Hi, Simon. It's so good to catch up with you.
Oh, it's been ages. It's nice to be back in the rhythm, isn't it?
I'm really enjoying it. So this is our second week on the bounce. Shall I clap? Okay, I'm going to clap in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is a podcast in which two friends talk about the pleasures, absurdities, and imperfections of being human. I'm Simon Ellis.
And I'm Lee Miller. Welcome to Midlifing. So, last week, you asked me, do I feel like a man?
Do you feel masculine?
Oh, okay, right, because I thought it was an offer. Do I feel masculine? So it's funny you ask that, because last week, I was listening. So when we recorded last week's episode, it was this week there.
By the way, I'm laughing because your lovely wife sent me a photo of you, and there's something that how I responded, which I'll include in this conversation once I let you finish.
Would this be the picture of me on a window ledge in Lisbon, by any chance?
It could quite possibly be that very same. And if we still had an Instagram account, I'd post the fuck out of it right there.
I would love that. Okay, so the question you ask is, do I feel masculine?
I'm sorry, that photo.
I know. It's lovely.
I'm going to stick it in the show notes if you let me.
I'll totally let you, because I think I look fire. Do I feel masculine? It's an interesting question that you ask. I've been listening to The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling.
Oh, I'm so curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
But keep going.
And I realise that I do not want to pick at the scab of trans politics.
Yeah.
I found myself at the end, actually just before the end of the series, so around about the halfway through the last episode, thinking, gosh, I feel much more sympathetic to J.K. Rowling as a result of listening to this. And then in the last half an hour, she managed to shit on all of the pancakes for me by giving what felt like really politician answers to a series of questions that the podcaster asked. And I was just like, oh, you know what? Now my sympathy has gone again, because it just feels like you've played everything and it doesn't feel sincere. And so I was like, it's so easy how you can so quickly lose somebody's support. Anyway,
your trust in, or anyway, okay,
yeah. But in a way, it doesn't matter that part of it, whether or not she has been subjected to witch trials and to what extent she's been culpable in encouraging a mode of behaviour online by engaging in it or engaging with it.
Yeah.
It's neither here nor there. I think it was really quite balanced. I think that both sides were given a relatively fair deal, and I found myself reflecting upon questions of gender, and thinking, oh, I just think that, because I'm a bit younger than she is. I was born in 1973. She was born in 1965.
Yeah.
I think my introduction to and training about gender was so much more about the notion of it being a performative.
You mean from when you got to university?
Yeah, when I got to university.
But not before then, right? It was only at university that Judith and Co got you there.
Yeah. But what it did was it allowed me to understand my own sense of self so much more clearly. So that sense of, do I feel masculine, is yes, no, maybe, sometimes, occasionally, not always, all the time. It's so
bendy.
It's so bendy because masculine means nothing.
Yeah.
It's such, for me, it is such a construction of social narratives. And I see stuff in the way men behave and find myself going, that's fascinating. That's not all men, some men. I just see their behaviors and go, I don't recognize that in me. I don't do that. And then I find myself doing exactly the thing that I didn't recognize in myself. I'm just doing it in a different context. So I'm, the kind of, there's a blokey, jokey, pokey silliness and that I see that makes me feel really anxious and uneasy when I see it enacted by certain people in one context, and then I catch myself doing exactly the same thing in a different context and going, well, why do I think it's not threatening, but that was threatening over there, and realizing that it's just so fluid. And so I think if you were to ask me the question, do I feel like a man? Yes, unavowedly, and without any clarification needed. Yes.
And so are you saying that's like a biological question?
Yeah. I feel at home in this body that I have been given. The things that I dislike about it are nothing to do
cultural
with
things.
There's sometimes I would like to have a flatter belly. Why would I like to have a flatter belly?
Sure.
Is it because it makes me feel uncomfortable, as in physically uncomfortable? No, I feel comfortable all the time. I like what I wear, so I don't wear tight things or chafy things. Things don't rub. I'm pretty much comfortable in my body. It does what I need it to do. It does what I need it to do quite well, actually. I just had bloods come back from the doctor. My prostate is working fine. My liver is good. There's some question about my kidney function, but it might have been because I hadn't had any water on the day that I was tested. They're going to run the bloods again on another day. My blood pressure is perfect. All of those sorts of things. It's great. I like the box that I carry around. So do I feel like a man? Yeah. Do I feel masculine? Oh, mate, that is a mouthful.
And so, but then if we agree that there's this phenomenon called toxic masculinity, then what is its other, or does it have an other? And I'm assuming that masculinity is not its other. I mean, it's not a word that I would use for myself these days, but certainly I recognize it in myself from, not so long ago. But it's not, I don't often think, I'm feeling quite masculine now. Like even in perhaps circumstances where you would think this is obviously a masculine thing to do. I'll let your imagination go wild. It's not like I'm going, I'm feeling masculine,
Okay. So do you not ever catch yourself filling up space in the world in a particular kind of a way and thinking, I feel quite blokey?
Yes, but yes, for sure that happens. But it's curious that I don't. I think the recognition of that. It's not a word. It's a really weird. It's not a word that comes to me under those conditions. Under
masculine.
Yes, it's not a. Mm-hmm. But yes, and so but to your point, I guess, or to your question, yes, I think that's exactly what's going on. I could apply that word to those circumstances. What is literally the opposite of toxic? When I say literally, I mean it in the literal sense of the word, just to clarify and see episode.
Well, I guess the opposite of toxic would be nourishing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Because if we imbibe something which is toxic, it doesn't nourish as it makes it. It's poisonous, yeah. So if something isn't poisonous, it must be nourishing because it helps us. It helps us continue to grow and develop and yeah.
So nourishing masculinity. Yeah, that's why I'm just wondering what the other narrative to toxic masculinity could be. Not because I think I want to prop up or somehow, perpetuate these kinds of Victorian divisions or Victorian certainties, you could call them. Not at all, but the fact of the matter is there is a thing, there are a class of behaviors or a class of attitudes that are labeled as toxic masculinity or as exhibitions of or performances of toxic masculinity, and they exist whether we like them or not. And so my thought is to go, what is the other narrative? In a way to complicate, to mess up, to create other possibilities for ways of being for men in terms of how we are labelled, because there has to be more than just you're toxically masculine or what. I'm not trying to excuse myself or recuse myself from toxically masculine attitudes and behaviours, right? Either in my past or my present. I'm not trying to suggest that I'm not like those men. Not for a second am I trying to do that. But even as you've talked about in terms of I use the word flexibility of masculinity, even within that concept, where we're all degrees and versions and many, many things. And so what are the other ways of describing particular behaviors and particular circumstances that are not toxically masculine? Again, not trying to clear my name.
I think what I bump against is that it feels like trying to assert other strata of masculinized behavior to give names to something which is resistant to or in tension with toxic masculinity only serves, in my head at any rate, to continue to allow space for toxic masculinity to exist. And I know I'm going Pollyanna and utopia, but I think where I get to is that what we have to do is dismantle the patriarchy, because toxic masculinity isn't the problem. It's a symptom of a problem. I think that the problem is the patriarchy. I think the problem are the systems and the schemas that have been put in place over centuries that serve to reify one type of being and diminish all others. So I hear what you're saying, and I applaud and I want to jump onto this project. I think the thing I struggle with is I think that what we need to do is dismantle the patriarchy. And I know that's a really crazy thing to say, because it's like, well, how do you start doing that?
Yeah. I mean, I not for a second, well, maybe a second, but I don't disagree. But and this is one of the things that this is certainly something that I think we recognise in each other as well. I think I would say as a key difference between us, and that is I think I tend towards the pragmatic in these kinds of things, which steers away from, I'm going to use the word idealism, but I don't mean it in any kind of pejorative sense of the word, because I think you're right that is the problem, and what I'm talking about is effectively a symptom of that problem. And so there's something about that because in a way I guess I'm thinking of young men who have heard the word, and maybe they've even heard themselves described as being toxically masculine. That's toxic masculine, or that's toxic. That's whatever it is. That's you're being toxically masculine. And the very pragmatic side of me is thinking of a young man going, one might be to get angry at that or to resist it, but then what other labels might be applied to other kinds of behavior? And maybe the word masculine is just the problem and all that. Maybe it's just about, it's really lovely. I really liked how vulnerable you were there. There are so many, it's so rich, our language, that ways of being which are anything but toxically masculine. And so maybe I'm barking up the wrong tree in terms of, a funny little, but So yeah, that's kind of what comes to mind.
I don't think you're barking up the wrong tree, and I think again, I was reflecting upon conversations that we've had whilst I was listening to that podcast, because I could hear.
You mean the witch trials of J.K. Rowling?
The witch trials of exactly. Yeah, sorry. I could hear in the way that some of the trans activists were speaking. I could hear my own vitriol reflected back at me, and I found it deeply uncomfortable to hear. I don't think I've ever thrown that vitriol in the direction of the grouping of women that are articulated as trans exclusionary radical feminists, because or TERFs for short, mostly because I don't feel that's an argument I want to get into, for a variety of reasons. But I have certainly heard the way I've spoken about Boris Johnson and his ilk to be as lacking empathy and full of, I guess, vitriol.
Yeah.
And I found how they were speaking and how I was reflecting upon how I have spoken to be ugly.
Well,
and I realised that I'm meeting behaviours that sicken me with behaviours that sicken me.
Yeah. Wow.
And so
wow.
that's been a massive takeaway for me. It's like, okay, I need to find empathy. I need to find empathy in this moment and remember that I am dealing with humans, and I'm also not responding to the human. I am responding to the way the human is being presented to me through their actions, in fact, through how their actions are being reported. The fact that there's people like Robert Jenrick who are allegedly asked to have images of cartoon characters painted over in a child reception centre for child immigrants because it was too welcoming. Okay, I have to take a moment there and not immediately go, bone cancer. Too good for him. He wants something worse than that, which is who I am at my baseline.
Yeah.
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 That's I am.
I mean, I'm catching
time.
up on the news as you're speaking it there, because I haven't followed that particular.
No. I know, but I was talking about this with Bob the day before yesterday, and we were laughing about the things that we have managed to sublimate, and one of the things that I have,
What a great conversation. Things I've managed to sublimate. Here, you start.
Oh, well, it's how we were talking about how we live together. Bob has an ability to, and she doesn't really care for this ability, but she can read micro expressions really, really well. So she knows when people are disappointed or upset or dismissive in a way that most don't notice.
She's hypersensitive.
Keenly
to those.
aware.
Yeah.
She's hypersensitive to changes in people's facial expressions, and as a result, that can often silence her. And she doesn't like that she can't ignore it,
turn it
or
off,
ride over it.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about how to sublimate that behaviour that is kind of embedded in her psyche, and I was talking about how I've had to work really, really hard to squash down anger. I'm constantly angry. That my first response to any situation is anger.
So the expression of it, or the feeling
of it.
Right.
I think I do a moderately good job of not expressing it all the time, but I express it more than I want, and certainly.
You mean when you say express, you mean in an uncontrolled way, right? Sort of, it leaks out of you or leaps out of you, as opposed to going,
out.
"Wow, I'm feeling really angry now."
I think I never resort to a physical expression of anger.
Sure.
But linguistically and verbally, anger is right there. It's right there. Bob and I were having one of those imaginary conversations. You know when you talk to one another but you're really talking to somebody else? Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't do this. Bob and I sometimes talk to one another this is going to sound so weird, but we're not really talking to one another. We're sort of rehearsing a conversation that we would have with somebody else.
I think I've heard you do this. This. Yeah.
And it amuses us, and we laugh, and it's but this particular
what a great thing to do, by the way. Just what
what a great thing to do.
What a great thing to do. What a great thing to do in terms of just the sort of the playing out and the teasing out of the possibilities of an imagined conversation in a different circumstance. I think it's an amazing thing to do.
Well, one thing is sometimes it means you don't have to have the conversation with the person that you think you have to have, because you have it and you solve it.
Yeah.
But also sometimes it means you fall into a pit of anxiety that you didn't need to open. so there's there's
at least you've planned for it. At least you've rehearsed it then.
Yeah, that's true. But we were having a very fun and engaging conversation while we were walking, Jeff, and I was being Bob in the conversation and having a conversation with somebody that she was due to have a conversation with. And I said some stuff and Bob just went, wow, that comes really easily to you. And it was unpleasant and kind of and vitriolic. And I went, yeah, but you know that I'm angry all the time, right? And she went, no, I don't know that about you. It's like, oh no, this is the stuff that just can immediately come to the surface. I find listening back to the way those people on the J.K. Rowling podcast were talking about TERFs, it made me feel ill, and I felt that way because I could hear myself so strongly in the way that they spoke. And so I am now, in the same way that once upon a time I said I wanted to try to be more curious, I am going to try to be less angry about things that I don't really know the full scenario. I need to spend more time with it, to sit with it, to be more considered.
Yeah, it's interesting, the J.K. Rowling, that podcast, when I listened to it, I kept on, you would say the word would be used as flip-flopping. My perspective on the subject matter of kind of the argument, you might say, it's not even the right word, but the battle over trans rights and what it means for second wave feminists, and that very complex, messy scenario. I found myself just shifting perspective on it all the time, and it was quite an amazing experience, because I realized that I felt like someone who votes for different electoral parties each election. I'm really convinced by that argument now. Oh, now I'm really convinced by that argument. It was really, really, it revealed something about a certain lack of, if I put it nicely about myself, a certain lack of dogmatism about that particular subject matter. It was a weird experience, though.
Why would there be not a nice way to say that? Because that's what I hear. Your ability to be sort of swung by the narratives.
Yeah, or the arguments, maybe as I'd like to say it. But yeah, I don't know. But if someone said, "Where do you stand?" I could go, "Well, I tend to think this. I worry when I hear the words "no debate," for example." And will be nothing surprising to anyone who's been listening to this podcast, or even who knows me a little bit.
Yeah, and I think I found myself being interestingly swung slightly towards a more moderate middle ground, because I've often said on this podcast that a society, if we want to have a tolerant society, we have to be intolerant of intolerance. And so there is a sense there that I'm, in a way, supporting the no debate. There's an implied shutting down, isn't there?
Yeah, well, not even implied, really. It's
No,
vitriolic.
Exactly.
But yeah.
And I think I hope my position isn't explicitly vitriolic, but
No. Sorry, no, I wasn't accusing you of anything then.
No,
that's next week on Midlife.
No, because I say that because I know I can be. I know that's my natural state. I just get cross.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is when I go back to whatever episode it was probably the last one, or maybe it was in this one, which is this comment that it's like a podcast which is anything but toxic masculinity. It's like the opposite.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that last week.
Yeah, thank you. And so this, and so this brings me back to what we were talking about last week. This listener saying it's like midlifing is like the opposite of toxic masculinity, and clearly this conversation sort of has built on that. And there's something about when you just described this sense of, you've been talking about how anger is really close, and then that you identify with particular ways of being which you're not really, let's say, proud of identifying with. And I was just thinking, it made me think that one of the things about this practice that you and I have, this practice of discussing these things effectively, not even effectively, in public, is that it makes possible, for me it makes possible to hear that anger, but to not be dissolved by it, to not see it as just you, that you are more than that. And it's not that you've been wildly angry on this podcast. I don't mean that. I recognize this in you, as I recognize it in myself as well. But it's like this practice, if it is anything, a practice of being in friendship, being in relationship with another person, makes all of those versions possible of ourselves. And I think there's just something about that which I think is incredibly, incredibly rich and fundamental to being a different kind of human being, or dare I say it, a different kind of man. So yeah, it's really, thanks. Last week when Finn was staying, I said, because I'd spent a lot of the time he was here wearing an apron. It's not a particularly masculine apron. And I said, Finn, this is a bit of a weird thing to say. And I had shorts on, so it pretty much looked like I was wearing
a dress.
Yeah.
A really nice dress.
Yeah. And I said, Finn, this is a bit of an odd thing to say, but can you find a way at my funeral to slip in something about me wearing aprons a lot? Just don't need to make a big deal of it. Don't need to, but just find a way to slip that into the funeral. That would be great.